enjoyed that? Enjoyed those songs? Just waiting for the thumbs up from Ben. We go. All right. So we have been listening to the world's greatest sermon, tribute. So looking at Matthew 5 through to 7, the Sermon on the Mount, and we've been in it for 2 weeks so far. So for those that are here that have been there, what can you remember? This is horrible of me, isn't it? Here's the test. What have we talked about? What's happened so far? What's that, sorry? The poor in spirit, that's right. What about them? Yeah, it's the turning of the values of the world, isn't it? Because they're blessed. That's what he says. He says, you're blessed. Who's he talking to? Do you remember that? He's actually talking to, and we know in Matthew's gospel, Matthew wrote it particularly to some Jewish Christians. And the Jewish Christians were under pressure from the non-Christian Jews who were about to or had already kicked them out of the synagogue. We don't know whether that had happened or not yet, but we know it was around that time. And the pressure that we're feeling, and particularly the idea that the Jews were saying to them that you're not really following Torah. You're not really doing the things right. And Matthew writes his gospel and uses Marx as sort of a backdrop to write stuff to them. And so we see that blessed are, aren't they? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are all these people that you think are not blessed. You know, the meek. They're no good, are they? Why would they be blessed? You know, the peacemakers, for Jewish people, that's the wrong idea. They're the wrong people. But that was our idea there. So we're going to move a little on from that. We'll actually go back in a second and look at something I want to see just for a moment. But today I want to talk about lamps and salty ovens. So what on earth am I talking about? We're going to find out, obviously. All right, this is Matthew 5:13 to 16. It says, "You are the salt of the earth. If the salt becomes tasteless, with what will it be salted? It's good for nothing anymore except to be thrown out and be trampled on by people. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill is not able to be hidden, nor do they fire a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on top of a lampstand, and it lights all the house. In this way, shine your light before people, so that they may see your good works, and they will praise your Father in heaven." All right. Who's heard that verse before? Probably most of you. If you haven't, good. Learn it. It's a good verse. But I've always understood the light bit quite well. That made sense to me. But the salt, I struggled with a bit. It seems an odd thing there, doesn't it? You're the salt of the earth. Now these days, salt is bad. You know, salt's one of the naughty words, and you're not meant to have much salt. I always find it funny when a church calls themselves salt, and I think, I understand the Christian idea, but the idea for other people around is like, well, salt's bad for you, you know. So there must be something in that. So we better look at that a little bit. But before we look at this stuff, I just want to recap a little bit of the bit before, called the Beatitude. And in it, there's a couple of repeated ideas. And I only want to bring it up now because at the end it'll make some sense. You know, hopefully it will. Some repeated ideas. So in there, if you remember, what's the first Beatitude, the first blessed are, was blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So that repeated at some point, didn't it? Do you remember? I did say it last week, so let's hear the quiz and see if anyone remembers. Blessed are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. No, people are lost. That's okay. You're reading your thing again, aren't you? Well done, John. It's on the screen. That's right, Lou's very clever. It's actually off on the screen. Blessed are those who are persecuted on account of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So the poor in the spirit get the kingdom of heaven, and the ones persecuted on account of righteousness get the kingdom of heaven. So it's interesting that he bookends it with that idea, doesn't it? Doesn't he? Which actually, and people in that time would have understood this because they were really practiced at this thing called rhetoric. It was a way of speaking and it told you things. And you knew what to pick up. We don't, because we don't use it now. We don't use the same ideas, the same things in it. But that would have told them, he's going to be talking about the kingdom of heaven. Because he used it at the start, he used it at the end, it makes sense. But there was another thing that was repeated in there. This one's a little more obscure in a sense. We've actually got it on our second verse there. It said, blessed are those who are persecuted on account of righteousness. Then he had this verse, who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That's interesting. And you'll notice that that one was in the fourth and the eighth one, because they were in two groups of four. The first four were passive things, and the next four were things that you do. And so yes, they were, righteousness was important. So the idea coming out of this is the righteousness of the kingdom of heaven. We're going to see it a bit this week. We're going to see it a lot in 2 weeks' time, about the righteousness of the kingdom of heaven. That's what this sermon is about. Or Jesus' sermon, my sermon, partially, about the righteousness of the kingdom of heaven. All right, let's have a look at our salt and things. So I said I didn't understand the salt of the earth very well. I don't know, how many of you think you've got a real handle on what that's about? Salt is flavour, that's good, that's one thing. So let's have a look. Let's look at the thing. You are the salt of the earth. If salt becomes tasteless, and actually the word there, Moronte, is useless, not tasteless. Should have actually said useless there, because that's what it means. With what will it be salted? It is good for nothing anymore except to be thrown out and be trampled upon by people. So in my years of being Christian, I've heard lots of sermons on this. And the first thing I heard about this was this idea that salt was how soldiers got paid. It's where we get our name. Have you heard that before? Where we get the word salary from. Salary is your saltery. Your bunch of salt you get. Now, can I say, that's what they thought, but it's now being sort of questioned as to whether it's fully true. It is where the word came from, but whether the soldiers really got paid in salt or not. It certainly could have been part of their payment, but yes. Salt was really important. It was a vital thing. We're going to see a little more in it too. This is the other thing that obviously was said, and it is right. Salt flavors and preserves food. I'll often, with my son Ben and sometimes with Lamb, when there's just us home and all the girls aren't there, we buy steak for dinner. Which is nice. And we make sure that we salt the steak well. And then we cook it only to medium rare. And it's lovely. Tastes magnificent. And so, yes, I love it when we do that. It's very good. Very tasty. One time we forgot to salt it, didn't we, Ben? And it wasn't so good. We went, we didn't salt it. Oh, no. It's no good. So it's true. Salt brings flavour and can actually bring out the flavour in things. It's really nice in that sense. My problem is when I look at this verse, it doesn't seem to fit what he's talking about, does it? You are the salt of the earth. Well, it could be the flavouring, yes. If the salt becomes tasteless, with what will it be salted? It is good for nothing except to be thrown out and be trampled on by people. Part of my past life is being a science teacher, math teacher mainly, but also science. How can salt lose its saltiness? Salt is salt. You know, you have sodium chloride is the main one, NaCl, for those that have done it at school. And it is that. How can it lose itself? Or it could be calcium carbonate, although we don't tend to eat that. It doesn't taste as nice. And there's various other salts. It just means, here's my science teacher coming out, isn't it? It means a metal mixed with a non-metal, and it becomes a salt. How does salt lose its saltiness? Sort of. But then it's not salt, is it? It's odd, isn't it? I look at it like from a modern scientific mind point, you go, what's he talking about? It doesn't make any sense. So we're going to just look at something. This is a Jewish peasant's home. And this helped me a lot in reading and in actually looking up for this bit. I went, oh, that's great. It's good stuff. This is going to help now and the next one a little bit. So this is something a guy named Bruce J. Molina, who is an expert in first century culture in Palestine and around. So he's really good at this stuff. He knows his stuff. Says the usual peasant house for the first century Palestine was generally a single room house adjacent to other single room houses in a U shape. So I've drawn a picture of this here and there. Oop, there we go. So that is the U shape. Doesn't quite look like it, but then it says in which all the houses fronted a shared use courtyard. So in the middle is the courtyard, walled off with a sun-dried brick wall, which is the bit at the end. And of course, they would have a gate through it. So I've left open, you know, like you do when you see the what do you call it? The floor plan of a house. They leave the hole where the door is, don't they? So I've done that because it was easier to make. And so we can see here, that's sort of the plan of the house. That's how they lived. In fact, the house was one of the rooms. So if you were a peasant, you and your family, and often that meant 3 generations of family, lived in one of those rooms. It's where you slept, where you ate, where you hid from a storm. But likely, during the day, you hung out in the courtyard or out on the street, even beyond there. So you could see it was functional in that sense. And you had other people around you. Now, that was only a 4-person. They had larger ones too. But that's the way they did things back then, the way they lived. If you were a semi-wealthy peasant, you might have had a whole one of them for yourself and your family, extended family. But you'd have to have some money, do you, to have that. Usually it was just one. So why have I brought this up when I'm talking about salt? I don't know. Yeah. It's bamboozling, isn't it? I bet as hell. I better get to something. All right. And this is Molina's talk on this exact verse. It says, the earth is an outdoor earthen oven found near the house. The ideal householder had a house that surrounded a courtyard, there we've got the courtyard, that contained an earthen oven with a double stove. There's our earthen oven with a double stove sitting there. Also had a millstone for grinding, a dung heap, there you go, there's a dung heap, and it had chickens and cattle. I put a sheep in because that's the most likely to have sheep, goats, possibly a cow if they were lucky. And they all lived in the courtyard. Yeah. Well, where do you think you get the dung from? This is the functional life of someone back then. See, when Jesus says these things, he knows what people are doing and what's happening in people's lives. He doesn't sort of say them accidentally, and we often don't have this background to us. Interestingly, people in the Middle East have lived this way for a long, long, long time, and they still sort of do. They just tend to have the courtyard home, and they have all the rooms now, but not always. It's very much the way they live. The courtyard's probably bigger than that compared to the rooms that I've shown there, but yes, that's the idea. So, what on earth has got this got to do with salt? It's got to have something, doesn't it? All right, so let's go back to our salty thing. You are the salt of the earth. If the salt becomes tasteless, with what will it be salted? It is good for nothing more except to be thrown out and be trampled upon by people. So, this is what Molina says of that. The earthen oven, which remember was called the earth, used the dung as fuel. Makes sense. The dung heap was salted. And this is interesting. Now, he didn't say this here, but I went and read it in other places. And this is something people have done for centuries up until very recently, because now we have chemicals that we think are wonder chemicals that are better than the salt. But you would have your dung heap and you'd chuck salt on it, and it would slow the fermentation so you could still burn the dung. Because if it went too far, it becomes compost, doesn't it? And you can't burn compost, but you can burn the dung. Makes sense, doesn't it? Very clever. People have done this for centuries. We just don't know about it because we've given up on that stuff because we live in a house that has no dung. That's right. Where's your dung? Come on. And salt plates. So I'll show you. This is a picture I found of a earthen oven of similar ilk. Can you see it at all? Someone's there, they're sort of stoking the fire, and on top is sort of like a thing, they're boiling a kettle, and they have little bits on the side that they use to cook things. And the dome bit, you'd put actually flattened bread inside. So yeah, and you see the flattened bread at the front that they've made from that earthen oven. So that, and then this is interesting, and salt plates were used as a catalyst to make the dung burn. Does anyone know what a salt plate is? I didn't have a clue. I read this and said, what on earth is a salt plate? It's pretty cool. Here's a salt plate. This is of Himalayan rock salt. And you use it. Now, what you can do these days with it, what people do, is they warm it up and they put their food on it and the salt exudes through and it's really nice. And you eat off the salt plate. You can do that. But still in Middle Eastern places, they will use this salt plate and they'll put it in to where the fire goes and it helps the dung to burn, because dung doesn't burn easily naturally. But your salt plates will heat up under it and keep it burning for longer. Does that make sense? Of course, your salt plate isn't pure salt, is it? It's actually, you go to a salt lake. We have salt lakes north of here. Has anyone been to a salt lake? Yeah. It's not pure salt, is it? It's salt and a bunch of other stuff. And they cut this up into chunks, and that's your salt plate. And so you put it in your oven, and it does its job. And the other thing that's really nice about it is it makes your food a bit salty and nice when you cook it. You put it in the oven, but what happened when the salt plate loses its saltiness? It's no good. That's right. It's no good. Luke's gospel says it really interesting. Jesus in Matthew's gospel says it is good for nothing anymore except to be thrown out and be trampled on by people. Luke says it like this: it is of no value for the earth, which is not meaning the ground, is meaning this earthen oven. It's the word gay in Greek, G-Y, or G, yeah, it doesn't matter. That's the word for it. And they use it for this actual thing. So it's of no value for the earth or for the manure pile. That's interesting, isn't it? See, that's confused theologians for a long time, until people started saying, well, what was happening at the time? Because why would it be of no use for the manure pile? But of course it was no use. The manure pile, you wanted the salt on it, and so you'd put salt. But if this hasn't got any salt, it's no good for the manure pile anymore, is it? For your dung pile. It's to be thrown out. This makes a bit more sense to me now. He's talking to people and things they get because it's something they have in their home area, their courtyard of wherever their home was. That's pretty good, isn't it? And he says, you are the salt of the earth. The thing that makes the oven work. You're the thing that makes the fire go better. You're the thing that gives it a bit of taste. That's nice, isn't it? I like that analogy. I've struggled for years to understand this analogy because it just doesn't make sense. But it does a bit more now to me. I go, oh yeah, that's not so hard. You're the salt of the earth. All right, let's move on. We'll go back and see a little bit of that later. You are the light of the world. He says this, doesn't he? You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill is not able to be hidden, nor do they fire a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on top of a lampstand and it lights all the house. That's an important thing, isn't it? Do you have a light in your house that lights all the house? I don't have a single light in my house that does, but of course we've got to remember the Jewish peasant's home, don't we? We talked about how it had the U and all that. And of course, you live in just one of those rooms. That's your house. And so it says it is in the one room house that is envisioned in the parable here, since all who enter it can see the light stand. There's a light stand, and what happens if you turn on a light there? Bing. Lights the whole house, doesn't it? Everyone can see it. And what's that, sorry? Oh, I did have fun making it. I like doing these things. You know I like doing these things. It's just fun. It's fun for me. I'm a visual learner. So when I see it, I go, ah. What's that? No, just that one. They're the only ones with a light. Sorry. I could have done that for you. That's true. No. I like what he says later. The normal way to put out an oil lamp was to put it under a bushel. Now, a bushel is the word they used. It sort of means basket. Same word that we've translated basket. You put it under this basket so as not to fill the house with smoke and fumes before you retired. Before one retired, he spoke. That's very regal sounding, isn't it? Before he went to bed, in other words. You'd put it under this, and so it would kill the flame, and you wouldn't get smoke all through the house from the oil that's burning. That's pretty good, isn't it? So when Jesus says this thing, you are the light of the world, a city set on a hill is not able to be hidden. That sort of, it's obvious. You put a city on a hill, you can all see it, can't you? Nor do they fire a lamp and put it under a basket. See, why would you fire a lamp and then put it under a basket? Well, you put it under a basket, that's turning off the light. We have a light switch, don't we? On and off. They had a basket. It's an oil lamp. It doesn't always just blow out that easily. Yeah. It's not quite that easy. So they would put this thing over it and it would snuff it. Good question. I don't know that. I just know that that's what they did. You know, and it's fair, you know, it's a good thing to do. The basket could have been large enough to put it over it, you know, it probably was. Well, some translate it bowl, some translate it basket, some bushel. It doesn't matter, it's all the same. Yeah, that's right. It's the same word in Greek and people translate it basket, bushel or bowl. It doesn't matter. A bowl would, in our head a bowl would and a basket wouldn't, but they often called it their basket. So, I don't know. I'm sorry, dear. I should have found that out, shouldn't I? That's not good of me. All right. So this is good. It's good to know that there's some understanding behind this, a little more. Anyway, what I really want to ask about this one, because that was a little throwaway, what I really want to ask in this one is, who is Jesus saying is the light of the world? Who's the light of the world? Is that? You're saying the Christians are the light of the world. Jesus is the light of the world. Oh, but he's not saying that. He says you are the light of the world. Here's the thing. At that moment, there are no Christians. Oh, what am I saying? Now, Matthew, in writing this, is speaking to some Christians and is saying that very much. But Jesus is speaking to a crowd of people. So I want to look a little bit at some Old Testament stuff here, because there's some verses that will really help in this. This is from Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6. It says, I, the Lord, officially commission you. I take hold of your hand, I protect you, and make you a covenant mediator for people. That's a tough sounding idea, doesn't it? Covenant, in other words, you're a go-between for the covenant with people. And a light to the nations. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Who do you think he's talking to here? You're a light to the nations. The Jews, you're saying. I think we might be getting on to something here. To open blind eyes, to release prisoners from dungeons, those who live in darkness from prisons. All right, we'll look at the next one. I've got another one that says it. He says, "Is it too insignificant a task for you to be my servant, to re-establish the tribes of Jacob and restore the remnant of Israel? I will make you a light to the nations, so you can bring my deliverance to the remote regions of the earth." In other words, yes, I think he's talking to the Jews here, isn't he? It's interesting, because they're doing that, aren't they? And this is, I found fascinating when looking at this. This doesn't say light to the world, but it says something else that says, actually from the very beginning they were meant to be this. This is Exodus 19, when Moses is giving the law. And this is Exodus 19, just before he gives the law, this is what he says to them. He says, "And now if you will diligently listen to me and keep my covenant, then you will be my special possession out of all the nations. For all the earth is mine, and you will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." So he's saying to the Jewish people, you're going to be a kingdom of priests. What's the job of a priest? Priest's job actually is to mediate God and humanity. So he's saying the whole Jewish nation, their job was to connect humanity to him. That's interesting, isn't it? We saw that earlier with "You are the light of the world," when he said that in Isaiah, to mediate to the nations, aren't you? Wow. You think the Jews thought of themselves in this way? Sort of. They certainly saw the first bit, "You will be my special possession out of all of the nations." They saw that. They saw they were blessed, but whether they saw the next bit too well, I don't think. In other words, their job was to show the world God. Oh. Makes a bit more sense when you look at Jesus saying, "You are the light of the world," doesn't it? You want to say something, Di? That's their idea. Keep the Torah and it will show. Yes. Were they showing? No. And we look at this, that he says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill is not able to be hidden." Were they showing that to the world? Or were they keeping it to themselves? All right. So we can say here quite clearly that it's the Jewish people, and if you look at it, the crowd that are around him are all Jewish people. So he's talking to a crowd of Jewish people and saying, "You are the light of the world." Ah. But Suzanne said something interesting earlier. What did you say when we asked who's the light of the world? Jesus is the light of the world. Oh, he says that, doesn't he? It says, "Again Jesus spoke, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." How does this work? The Jews are the light of the world, but Jesus is the light of the world. What I love about this, there's so much more. When you read these things, you go, "Oh, that's good," but then you find out some of the stuff around it. Does anyone know what was happening when Jesus said this? Feast. It's called the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a feast about the fact that they were in the desert, they were living in tents. Tabernacles, or booths, they called it, and they're living in booths or tents. The sort of words are interchangeable in Hebrew to Greek to us. And he says this then. So they had a couple of things they were celebrating then. They were celebrating the living in tents and being led by God. And they were celebrating God as the light in the desert. That God led them. And you can see the picture I put there is an artist rendering of God as the light in the desert, leading them. And so they're celebrating this thing, and Jesus stands up and says, "I am the light of the world." That's a pretty big thing to say, isn't it? We're celebrating that God is the light of the world, and a guy gets up and says, "I am the light of the world." Yeah, it makes more, it's stronger, isn't it? It's dangerous. That's what it is. in the middle of the feast that celebrates this thing, what's also interesting is he's celebrating this thing, and it's at a time when they're celebrating God in their midst. In the desert, they were sitting in their tents, and God was in their midst. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Then he says to the Jews, you are the light of the world. And yes, he does it by proxy sake to the Christians then, doesn't he? They would move. They followed. And that's what we've got here. The people in front of him are the light as God, the true light, is dwelling among them. And they follow his ways. That's why Jesus said, I am the light of the world, and anyone who follows me will have the light of life. Wow. Just like in the desert, when the light was there and it moved, they followed it and they had the light of life with them. It's a stunning idea, isn't it? So when he said these things, the crowd would have it triggered things in them because they've heard these words before. It's not something they didn't know about. Something they knew well about. You are the light of the world because God is dwelling among you. God is in you. So let's have a look at what do I got to say? Let's have a look at Matthew 5 to finish off. Quite quick today. Interesting. It says, you are the salt of the earth. In other words, you're the thing that makes the oven work. You're the thing that makes the food able to be cooked and taste good. You living in the world because God is living in you. Because you are the people of God with God living in you. That's the impact you have. In following Jesus, you are salt to the world. You get it on fire. You help it to burn, keep burning. You cook the things that need to be cooked. The salt becomes tasteless. With what will it be salted? It's good for nothing anymore except to be thrown out and be trampled on by people. What does he mean by that? This is the truth. If you walk away from God being in your midst, if you walk away from the righteousness that he has and that he lives in you, what good is there? What good will come of you? It won't, will there? People won't see that light. They won't know the saltiness. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill is not able to be hidden, nor do they fire a lamp and put it under a basket, but they put it on top of a lampstand, and it lights all the house. In this way, shine your light before people, so they may see your good works and praise your Father in heaven. That makes sense now, doesn't it? So they would see your good works because the righteousness of God lives in you and moves your heart to righteousness, to life, to the righteousness of the kingdom of God. And when people see that, who are they going to praise? They're going to praise your Father who's living in you, who's by his Spirit. They're going to praise the God who makes you so, who makes you loving, who makes you merciful, a peacemaker, meek. All the things that were talked about last week. The God who makes you like that. He will bless you, and you will bless others in being that. That's the plan of God for us. It's the plan of God for the church. The church that is considered the new Israel. The Israel to come. That are the people of God with God dwelling in their midst. Our job is simple. Stay with God in our midst. It's not a hard thing, is it? Remain. Follow me, Jesus said. Follow me and you will have the light of life. You will not lose it. And God's righteousness will shine through you. That's the key here, I think. We are the light of the earth. We don't have to do anything hard to be that. We just need to remain with God. Remain with the Spirit dwelling in us, impacting our hearts, impacting our lives. And we will bless people in just that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much that we don't have to work at this. That we are the salt that brings food, that keeps the fires burning. That we are light to this world. Not because we're somehow extra special or we're extra good, but because you live in us. You live within your church, within your people. And you love to shine through us. Lord, help us to rest in that truth. Rest in that truth that you live in us. And that you, who are the true light, light up in us. Lord, bless us in this, that we may trust your truth. Open our eyes to see it. And Lord, bless many people through us, we pray. Amen. Hope you've enjoyed that little journey in Salt and Light. I know for me it was eye-opening this week studying it. I've been studying it for a little while, but it's wonderful. It's good stuff. My essay that I'm doing now, I have to link it to the next bit. But you don't have to deal with that. Yep. Good because all we've got is the Greek that says it, and if you follow it literally, it says the earth. But also because I think there is a double statement there. When Jesus says it, he's saying, you're the salt of the earth, yes, this oven, salt of the earth as well. I think he wants both things in there. I should have said that in my sermon, shouldn't I? Sorry. And you're exactly right. Great question. Because light of the world, he's extrapolating it out too, isn't he? With light of the world, salt of the earth. So they're looking at and they're understanding, particularly when he says the manure pile or that sort of stuff in Luke. He is talking about that thing. But there is definitely the idea, well, it's the earth too. Maybe he meant that double statement. Good question, John. Great question. Anyway, we'd better sort of move on. We're soon time for tea and coffee and things. We've got a couple of notices. One really important. Next week we've got our guest speaker, musician Benny Prasad, which I'm quite excited by, with his very strange instruments. And I'm looking forward to I hope he plays the bentar, the 54 stringed it is. So we're talking about 54 strings. Yeah. We did show a few weeks ago, we showed a clip of him playing this thing. It was quite impressive. So I hope he plays that. And also afterward we're having a barbecue dinner. And Steve talked to me, he asked, can people bring along salads? Those that are coming along, bring along salads to share. That would be great. And Steve will cook up the barbecue. And I know we've talked about, I think Kesh and Lou looking at bread and things. We'll have to probably bring some sauce too. But other than that, that'll be great. So it should be a really good week. So come along. I've invited several people. Hopefully they come. Who knows? You never know, do you? And we'll set up like we do as a cafe type environment. And I'm looking forward to hearing Benny. And his wife, who comes on, she's a beautiful singer too. So should be good to hear. The other thing I have to speak about today, this is an interesting one. Oh, look at that. Autonomy. All right, now that's actually a silly thing that I put up there, but it's to remind me to talk about this. That's all that's about. Many of you know we were started, like Lou and I were part of a church up in Stirling, and we started this from that. And technically we're still under them officially. legally in all those ways. We're part of them. And I quite like that arrangement. It's quite good. But the long-term goal is to be what you call an autonomous individual church, which has some government things to it and some governing things to it. And in talking with the senior pastor there, Ben, we're putting together a bit of a timeline. So it still won't be next year, but probably sometime the year after is when we want to be able to actually do this and be autonomous. And so there's some things in place. I know John has already sort of been looking at finance things, and has put together a bit of a team of finance, isn't there? But we also want to put together a team to look at the other governance issues. So hoping to have people with skills in certain areas. So if you have a certain skill in an area that you think I'm good at, administrative things like governance, then come to us and talk. But also at the same time, we want to have this as something that's an open forum that people can hear and know how we're going with this, what the ideas are, how we're going to be structured as a church. Some of this is very like official government have to be sort of things. Like according to government laws, every church has to have, in their constitution, has to have certain things, certain ways of doing it. Some people belong to church denominations where the denomination is the body that oversees every single bit. We belong to one where actually the individual church does. So we have to have some legal things in place. Is there anything else, John, that you think could be said about this? Yeah. Yeah, he's given us a great line of guidelines. So if you feel like you've got some skills in that area, come to John and say, we've got time to do this, and we want to take time, because we don't want to rush and suddenly be out. That's the idea. It's a working together and working with Ben and the Sterling board there as to how we want to be incorporated and how we work. So, yes. It looks exciting when I've got it up there, but it's not that exciting a thing, is it? It's something we have to talk about, and it's good. All right, I think that's all I have to say today. Other than that, there is banking details there for those who give. Thank you to all you who give, and if you give by cash, you can give at the back there in our little letterbox that we give. Other than that, have a great week. Enjoy tea and coffee after now, and hope to see you next week with Benny Prasad. Excellent.